All right, welcome to the presentation of our tides. You're not going to see my face because it will cut out some of the important information. So I'm doing this because I know some of you are not going to be here. So tides, we're going to cover what are tides, causes of tides, tidal variations, lunar day and frequency of tides, and monitoring tides, but I think we'll probably just cut it down to the first four. So what are tides? We talked about this in class already, but they're the most reliable phenomena on Earth. They occur regularly and they're predictable. And what they are, they're just the changes in local sea level that are a result of waves. So here's a photo of low and high tide at the Bay of Fundy. So we talked about this already. And so when the highest part of the tide crest reaches the coast, it's high tide, and then you have, of course, and low tide occurs when the lowest part is or the trough reaches the coast. So we can see the flood current coming in. There's a little piece of green algae floating there, and then the ebb current is when it's going out. So you have your high tide is when your flood current's coming in. The low tide is when that ebb current goes out, and that difference between the high and the low tide is called your tidal range. And so if you look on that image there, you can see where that tidal range is. All right, so what the tidal current is, it's that movement of water that accompanies the rise and fall of the tide. So that's your tidal current, up and down. That's your tidal current. And so the incoming tide, as I just said, like into bays and estuaries, is called your flood current. That's when it's going in. That's when the tidal current, right, that horizontal movement. And then the outgoing is your ebb. And so here is, tidal currents are really important in such places like there's the San Francisco Bay there in that image there. And so those tidal currents are important for bringing materials in and taking materials out. And so causes of tides, and you're going to be watching some videos over this, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but essentially what the main cause of tides is the gravitational influence of the moon. So you have the Earth there. You've got A and the A with the like apostrophe, and then on its tilt, and then you have the moon there. And essentially, what happens is as the Earth rotates, right? um, there's these two bulges, and the bulges are those is the pull on the moon. The moon has a gravitational force, and since most coastlines experience two high tides and two low tides, because as the Earth rotates, the moon is also orbiting, and so that's what's caused that fluctuation. So it's essentially the moon is the major cause of tide because of gravitational influence. And so again, there's your high and low tides, and we'll talk more about that later. So here's the most common model for the Earth that has two tidal bulges because of gravity inertia. So there's the moon. There's a tidal bulge due to gravity, tidal bulge due to inertia, but so there's going to be this unequal pulling. And so essentially, if asked, the moon has the greatest influence. So if we got A, B, and C, you're going to be drawing this in the video. So on the side of the Earth facing the moon, the gravitational interaction, that's A, right? On the opposite side, you have the Earth in the middle, B, and then you have C, and you have that inertia creating that second bulge. But as you can see, the moon has that greater pull on A and B, and then the pull of C, right? So you have these two bulges there. So one simple way to think about this is that the Earth is pulled away from the water on the far side because the gravitational force by the moon at point B is larger than exerted at point C. And so this is pretty simplified. And so I'm going to skip that. So basically, thus, the tidal forces are based on the gravitational interaction between two or more bodies. Thus, the moon being closer has a much stronger effect on tides on the Earth than the sun does. And so that's kind of what your CR is going to be about. So tidal variations, the first one is the alignment of the moon and the sun. Both the sun and the moon have effects on tides on the Earth, and so when the Earth, sun, and moon are aligned, the effect on the sun and the moon are additive, and this is called your spring tide. These are your highest tides. So if you look at that spring tide, it's when the Earth, moon, and sun are lined up, and so you can see solar tides and lunar tides there. So there's the moon, right? Um, so you can see once the Earth is in between the sun, excuse me, once the moon is in between the Earth and the sun, and then you also have a spring tide again when they're lined up, but again, the moon is on the dark side. So when they're not aligned up with their right angles, it's called a neap tide. So these are your moon results in lower high tides and higher low tides. That's your neap, and they usually occur during the first and third quarters of the moon. You'll be drawing these out for a TED Talk. So there's your spring tide, neap tides, right? Spring, neap, back to spring. And so solar tides, lunar tides. As you can see, though, the moon does have that greater effect. So we're going to skip this one. So Earth's orbit is slightly eccentric, and so the perihelion is when the Earth is closest approach to the sun. It's about 147.1 million kilometers. Aphelion is the Earth's farthest distance, and the difference between these is about 5 million kilometers. But since the tidal influence of the sun is a function distance, the small changes between the distance of the Earth and the sun results in a small change in solar tides. And so again, this can also have an effect on the tides. The moon's orbit again is probably the greatest influence, and so Perigee is the moon's closest approach. It's about 363,000 kilometers. Apogee is the moon's farthest, but again, these farthest and closest distances will also have effect on the tides. And so again, there's a thing called a king tide, and that's when they're all lined up. And so the effect of the eccentric orbits of Earth and Moon have a small influence, and mostly affect by only a few inches. It can be additive. It's commonly described as extra large tides, and so they're sometimes called king tides. And this is when the Earth, the Moon, the Sun are all aligned at a perigee and perihelion. So that's when you're going to see these king tides. So usually in January, and you'll have one in July. We're not worried about regional factors. The lunar day has an impact because most coastal areas experience 2 high tides and 2 low tides in a cycle. It takes about 24 hours and 50 minutes. That extra 50 minutes is because the moon is trying to catch up to the Earth. And so a lunar day is the amount of time it takes for a specific point on Earth to rotate from an exact point under the moon to the same point. And again, so a lunar day is 24 hours and 50 minutes. And so often when we're looking at tides, they're usually 50 minutes later each day. One of the last things, an area, so when we talk about tides, we got to talk about high and low tides. So there's diurnal. If it's experiencing 1 high tide and 1 low tide each lunar day, it's diurnal, so 2. So 1 high, 1 low. Semi-diurnal tide cycle is if it experiences 2 high and 2 low, so semi, so it has 2 high tides and 2 low tides. And then mixed semi-diurnal is if it has 2 high and 2 low, but at different size every lunar day. And so you can see the difference. So there's a diurnal, high and low, semi-diurnal, and then you're mixed. And so monitoring tides, we're going to skip. So again, this was just to kind of give you a brief overview for those who won't be here. So hopefully you found this helpful. And again, I think the videos that we're going to watch are going to be much more beneficial. So again, hopefully you found this helpful. Sorry you couldn't see my face, but that's it. So if you got any questions, be sure to reach out.